Tom Knific is a versatile bassist whose career spans jazz, classical, and contemporary music. He's worked with legends like Dave Brubeck and Randy Brecker, and has even performed with orchestras across North America and Europe. As professor emeritus at Western Michigan University and a top educator worldwide, his impact on bass and jazz education is huge. He's published works, performed on over 30 albums, and continues to inspire audiences and students globally. And we are thrilled to dive into his journey and insights. Tom, good to see you.
Thanks so much, Abe, for putting this together. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you being here. Tom, let's start with something fun. The acoustic bass, stand-up bass is very large instrument. It requires a lot of carrying around, a lot of practicing to keep up your technique and chops and everything. And you've been playing for such a long time. If your instrument could talk, how would how would it describe your relationship with it?
That's a really fun question. The thing is, it's a full contact sport. I like to say it just takes over your life in a certain way that you want to invest in it in a way that it gives you back what that you want to get out of it and what is possible to produce. What it would say, it's like we've got to stop meeting like this. I spent a lot. In fact, I was just in the shed right up to this moment before this interview because I found a bass, an instrument in particular that I can use in all settings. I used to have a classical bass and a jazz bass for years. Sometimes I have to run around with both, so it had to be a Volvo wagon or some such thing to get them in. But now I've got this one instrument that has a really interesting pedigree, and it's been the thing. So I've taken it on chamber music situations, chamber orchestra. I don't do a lot of full orchestra anymore, but certainly like just a ton of jazz outings. And I just got back Monday from my first, I guess it's new grass, bluegrass. I was calling the music prog grass
Oh my
because
goodness.
edgy stuff. I've never done that. And there's a dobro player and a fabulous mandolin player, Don Julin, whose quartet we were out with, and a great guitar player from Columbus, Ohio. So now this bass, which is 140 years old from the Czech Republic, is been it's experienced all these things, and it's obviously had a longer history and will have a longer history than myself. So it's probably also saying bring it on at this point, or what a party, because the just to start a new style at my point in my career was, I jumped into it, but it was even more fun than I anticipated. So
Well,
um,
when you start exploring a new genre of music, I mean, because you've had the opportunity to play all these different styles before that, do you try to go in like I'm going in with a clear mindset, or do you have any, preconceptions with the other styles you've played just kind of creeping their way in?
Absolutely. This project in particular, the mandolin player wanted to get like a hybrid group or a group of new musicians together. He wanted to see where this can go. And he's had his eye on me. I guess he's known me for 40 years. He came to concerts that I played when I worked at Interlochen when he was, probably a teenager or maybe early 20s. And but we never really worked together until this tour. And I think he definitely wanted me to bring some of my own perspective on stuff. So I had a ball. I was trying to do not overplay some of those grooves. And then on the other hand, if I saw a 6/8, I can't help but see a bembe or a naninga or something, or a biome and other things. And he loved it. So it worked. So far, so good.
Yeah, when you're coming from being so involved, and I always like to think of classical and jazz as the teachers of all the other styles, hence
Yes.
the reason they offer them um at the universe on the university level, at most of the institutions we see. And it seems to me that you're almost it's like two different worlds for you, right?
I grew up. The funny thing is I had a very early jazz start on guitar. Was my first instrument. I started in third grade, and back in the '60s, everybody had a guitar and everybody was taking lessons. And apparently, if you had a guitar for more than a year, you could be a teacher at one of the music stores. And I've heard, but I was very lucky. I had a teacher that was actually very adept. I mean, he was into Johnny Smith, and he was showing me voicings that my hands could barely deal with in sixth grade. And we're still in touch. He's in his mid 80s, and we still chat. And he's a sweetheart and really pointed me in the right direction. My family had music going on. Older brother was a professional drummer by the time he was in high school, and so the record collection was very, very influential. but I always wanted to play classical music from a very early time. So that time they didn't have young bass programs. So by the time I was old enough to really play double bass, I jumped into that and I kept them both going. Well, pedagogically, I kept the guitar going and I still play on it. But in terms of performance, the bass at some point kind of takes over your life, especially if you're trying to do both classical and jazz on it. And
Right, right.
the guitar is there for music therapy and composing, and then, some teaching as well.
And you've been an educator for such a long time, and you have to. Do you almost feel like like this? It's like a sense of responsibility in a way that it's something deeper than like I'm just teaching, but like this is my life and I'm trying to really mentor this person. Like, have you ever given any unconditional advice, you think that
It's
some students might
interesting
be like,
because
I'm not sure.
apparently that's happening even when I don't realize it. I'm playing with a lot younger musicians, and I'm very honored that they remember me or want me, or attracted to having me in their band. So I'm running around with musicians that many who are younger than my children, at this point. And I find myself giving, life lessons and musical lessons in like a broader sense of things, not necessarily. And sometimes it's as simple as like, you should really try playing that there, or, how about this voicing? But more often it's like larger, issues of life and perspective and, ways of looking at things that seem to just, I can't seem to not do that,
But
and
even the way you're talking about, that you work with musicians, who are younger than you, but you don't say that with any sort of contempt.
oh no,
Because
I'm getting so much,
yeah, I mean
I'm
that's the
having
mind, right?
a whole nother, yeah, a whole, it's wonderful. I mean, I'm having a ball.
Yeah, because some people, maybe they might feel that because they're a little older, they need to, sort of show them something, but you're aware that the music is still evolving and it's a breathing art form.
Absolutely. And in some cases, I'm just trying to keep up, I mean, there's some fabulous, there's a violin player that I started working with recently, Grant Flick, who can easily go from, I don't know, Joe Venuti to Ornette Coleman in the same piece and bluegrass and everything in between. He's just a savant. And to solo after him on the double bass and he's ripping stuff off on the violin is, I mean, I think it's good to have those experiences throughout one's life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, when you play with these musicians, it's when you play jazz, it has such deep roots, but it's still changing.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, right? What does it mean to you to create something new in this genre with so much history? Would it be maybe bringing in your classical training into it, like things that you've learned in the past, those techniques? Like, what would that mean?
Absolutely. I'll pull out a bow in situations where most people might not have considered it, or, the music might not on the surface call for it. But in many cases, it's a great decision, and people hearing textures and sounds, and it's like bingo, really, really works. So certainly that. And then, in terms of, it's interesting because the jazz music requires the sense of form and harmony and things, and classical music requires a sense of like really thinking about phrases in different ways, where the direction of phrases, where in jazz, sometimes we're just trying to get, a bar or so many beats to line up. And in classical music, the larger structures require like a little bit greater sense of overview. And I think,
Where do you think the bow got lost in the jazz idiom?
that's
Because it's such a, we don't see it really too much these days.
not too much. Well, for one reason, it's really hard. It keeps me really honest. I'll tell you what I'm working on for going on 2 months, and we're going to go into the studio. Finally, I'm going to have all my own so-called classical works recorded because most of them have been commissions. Some people have just put them up on YouTube on their own, and some people have actually recorded them very well. But I've never actually recorded any of those works, much less all of them. So I'm in the process of getting that together. It's a humbling experience. I can't work on it enough.
Yeah, that's a
So
big document. Like you're like,
that's
documenting
probably
that
the
all
big
those.
thing. But I will say this: I remember I got to be friends with John Patitucci met in the '90s, I think, when he was working with Danilo Perez. Got to have him at the house, and of course, evolved a relationship since then. But he stopped for a while. It reminds me a little bit of Sonny Rollins stopping and going to the Brooklyn Bridge. I think that was the bridge he played on. But John Patitucci stopped for a second to get his bow together. And I think, at a time where he didn't need to stop working because he was in demand. So I love that. I love to hear that, you know. And Rufus Reed, of course, studied with Warren Binfield at Northwestern University, and Dave Holland went to what was one of the great schools in London, Guildhall, I think. So, and those are Dave is one of my teachers, you know, and so those are the people that you know taught me a certain level of to try to aim for. At least, you know, you shouldn't go below this in accuracy. And
Yeah, let's talk about Dave if that's okay, because I remember I saw him at the Village Vanguard with a great trio, and I think I might be wrong about this, but I think he brought a like a Zoom recorder on the stage with him to record his performance. But
great.
the way he walked to the stage was just he had such a young energy about him, and like he's still just as curious about this music as he
Mhm.
was when he was playing with, Jack DeJohnette and Miles Davis or something.
Yeah. Is this a recent performance you went to? I mean, the
This
last
is a
couple.
couple of years ago.
Okay. So yeah, that's him. I mean, he's got a curious mind. He's got a very how do I put it? I think he demands a lot of himself, and that's what I got being around him. I mean, it seems like there's nothing he would ask you to do that he hadn't asked himself to do, you know, 100 or 1,000 times already. So he kind of keeps himself at a certain standard and a ridiculously high standard. But he's always creating new ensembles. I mean, this whole thing with Zakir Hussain and Chris Potter. It's like some wonderful stuff, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, obviously he's still seeking, you know.
He's a legend. I mean, do you take a lot into your teaching lessons you had with him, or was there someone else who's kind of influenced your
He
teaching concept?
He definitely gave me a lot in that way. My finishing school in classical music was a guy named Franco Petracchi, who I studied with in Italy at the Chigiana Academy in Siena, and he's the one that totally kicked my butt over like the goalpost. Is like, whoa! And all the lessons were in public, you know, on a stage with a pianist, so like a master class set up at all of them. So I mean, you really get prepared, and we've had a relationship since. I've gotten to do projects with him, present him at one of the bass conferences here, and he was maybe the first guy to really get me to understand, you know, what you should expect of yourself, and a path, more importantly, a pathway of how to get there, you know, because it's really easy to browbeat or to, you know, demand, but it's a whole nother thing to give somebody a methodology or a technique or a pathway to potentially achieve that. And he
Yeah,
did that.
and I'm also kind of curious too because when we grow as musicians, we have to unlearn things.
Oh,
And, um, I it's something we don't may not necessarily realize when we're practicing hours and hours a day.
yeah.
What do you find yourself refining in recent years or kind of trying to unlearn?
Yeah, well, I started off with a brilliant, wonderful teacher, but they weren't technically orientated on the bass. It was more conceptual, which filled my heart and mind with all kinds of you know, great thoughts and imaginings about music and visions of it and stuff. But it, you know, physically, it was almost, because you were kind of left on your own. It was almost damaging on that instrument, because the bass can be a cruel mistress, you know, and you could get hit with people walking around school with you know, the braces on. It's like, I don't want to be that person. So early on, I realized that I had to look out for myself, and that's how I ended up going to Italy and getting some other teachers along the way, um, that seemed to really, I could see how they're better students, how they functioned. So
Yeah, and
that was a big unlearning learning period in my 20s.
the physical component too. I mean, I actually, I'm a guitarist. I had neck surgery about 3 years ago just because
Oh my, oh
my
my.
posture was just I played with the worst posture for like 20 something years with my head down like this, and it really did some serious nerve damage.
I'm so
But
sorry.
yeah, but I'm feeling much better now. How do do you still have to do like different stretches and stuff to
Absolutely, because I mean, again, this instrument is it's unforgiving. So I do stretches. I go for deep tissue massage pretty regularly. I get people to do stuff that they said, "Oh, none of our clients would let us do that." No, please don't stop, you know, because I found that that's been a lifesaver for me, you know, because all shoulders. And also I have a running injury in my left leg, knee, from doing silly things, trying to run in mountains, and So that's haunting me, and the playing doesn't help. So a deep tissue massage has been one of my best friends. I stretch too and do a little bit of yoga, but these people that I try to identify people that really understand what I need, and they'll go for it. And it doesn't feel great at the time, but it's like releases everything.
I started on upright in high school, so I played upright for 4 years, and I didn't, the teacher just kind of gave us the instrument and
Yeah.
put you in a room and just gave you a book, said you have to teach yourself, and then we were playing like Gustav Holst and stuff, having no one taught us anything whatsoever. So I
That's a
shortly learned
dangerous
about like
pedagogy.
what'd you say? I'm sorry.
That's a dangerous approach, but it's like everybody went through. I went through that too at some point, like it was probably middle school, and it's like you can hurt yourself.
Oh yeah, and I remember the blisters I first got and stuff, and it was just it's unforgiving.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
So let's talk a little bit about, just, because we all have um, that certain maybe recording or concert that really got us to sort of, go in the jazz direction, commit to the, my teacher at Berkeley told me when you decided you were going to become a jazz musician, you basically decided to make your life a living hell at this point.
I have to say, I was told people, and we were in the position of admitting students to schools. I was a professor for 38 years, so there's a lot of meeting parents and things. And I always say that music chooses you. And if there's something else you think you really could do and would like to do just as much, probably do that. Because it's very tricky. But I can tell you my first, other than hearing my brother had a fabulous record collection and I was always hearing things and borrowing. But the first records I bought were actually like really spread out wide. I was in New York. I was my 13th or 14th birthday for a family trip and ended up at the record store for my birthday and picking out things. And I got a Tal. I was really mostly a guitarist then, so I got a Tal Farlow record. Tal Farlow Return of Tal Farlow because he'd been played. That record had been played on the local radio station. Totally opposite end of the spectrum. Freddie Hubbard's Straight Life, which is like
Oh, my one of my favorite records.
one jam on each side of the LP with all my favorite plays. I still quote from that album that I got in 1973 or something, 2, 3. I still quote from it to this day. I've even like written it into some things. And then Dave Brubeck live at the Newport, which was super fortuitous. And I was transcribing that in my own little way, again in middle school. When I got to tour with him, the first one of the first times, I guess, it was like a real like last minute thing. I was subbing for Jack Six, and all of a sudden I'm on an airplane with him, and my bass is in first class, and I'm sitting next to him, and he says, what do you know of mine?" And so I'm naming all the tunes. He's got a book, he's pulling them, and then I said, "Oh, of course, live at Newport," which is kind of an obscure one from that. That wasn't a famous. I mean, it was great, it's all jam tunes and live. But I think the blues for Newport was something he made up on the spot. It had that vibe to it. So I'm sure the band hadn't played that in years and years and years. So, he included it in the set that night. We got to the Opera House in Delaware, I think. And then like we just sound check and go. And he calls the tune. And I actually, I've listened to it since I was 13, 14. So I nailed it. And the ending is kind of weird and tight. And I nailed that. And the whole band turned around and looked at me.
Yeah, but does that like kind of feel in those moments it must feel surreal, like you're like almost looking at yourself like
Like
you're
an
looking at
Atari
your
machine. Yeah, it was totally surrealistic. It was like that was one of the most magical moments of my life. I will also say in that same concert, I guess we could figure out what year was Miles had just passed, and that Dave had written In Your Own Sweet Way for him. And so in the middle of the concert, and you imagine I'm sitting in the crook of this 9 foot Steinway piano. He just played In Your Own Sweet Way as a dedication to Miles' solo, and I'm just sitting with my head almost in the piano, and it was. I still get the tingle. I'm getting the tingles right now. It's
just
just
talking about it, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's that it's music is just they say it's the universal language.
The
You
other thing
know,
I love, some people say it's at this point in time the only way to time travel.
yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Well, when you music is the universal language, and was that you think talking about that concert with Dave is like a moment where you felt, that truth come alive based
No,
on looking back at
absolutely.
your. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, my entire being from that age on. And Dave had, even though he wasn't like a classical pianist, I mean, he studied with Mio, and he knew and he wrote orchestra and everything that all that came into play, all that sensibility. And I think that's why he wanted me around too.
Yeah, no, I mean that's, when you it's a privileged position just to be in that. I mean, there's no
Oh,
other way to say it.
absolutely. And no kinder man that I've ever met in my life. He insisted on writing a letter for I was going up for tenure that year and at the university, and he insisted on writing a letter for me.
Oh, wow.
I'm kind of a bulletproof application. So
So, let me ask you about, so it's just when we play, we have to, there's just moments where the music, it's, where if let's say we're just talking about a, straight ahead jazz context, when we're
yeah,
talking, the music either feels okay, it was good, or it was like at that other level where
yeah.
everyone's just kind of in the zone. And I always try to like figure this out with musicians, like, is it just that everyone's just on the same mindset, or is it like just there's like a level of silence underneath the music, or like, what do you think it is?
I think all those things are true. There's a point at which you're feeling the direction of the music more than just like the playing of it. It's like, where it's going here or there, because that may or may not happen within a quartet. It may happen between two people, often two of the members of the groups. It may happen with three, but to get everybody like feeling like it's going in the same direction, and you can do no wrong.
It's so funny when you're like, when you feel like you were in that zone and then someone else just, I didn't feel that way at all. That
I
wasn't.
know, I know, I know. I've had conversations with producers that said like some of the best performances have been when there's been tension in the band, and like I'm not that guy. I'm not very confrontational, but I can see that too. And we were talking about Billy Hart earlier, who had
Yes, yes.
talk about any one person that had. I worked with him starting in 1991, and I guess maybe for 10, was that almost over 20 years, and quite a bit over 20 years. And he was that guy. I mean, he was connected to so much of the past, Wes Montgomery, and of course Herbie, and well, everybody. He was well over 1,000 recordings at that point in his life. He's probably, halfway to 2,000 or more at this point. And just to get that information, and he loved to talk about it, not about himself, but about the music and the contexts. And he would bring in every time we'd get together, he'd bring in the last group's book he had, whether it was George Mraz or Chris Potter. So I've got this whole collection of all these guys' books. I don't know if they know that, but
Yeah, and it's so when I've been talking to some drummers recently, and it's like he is usually the first person that they mention, and I certainly won't forget the first time I ever, got to hear him play.
yeah, yeah.
And this is great. Tom, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you one more thing. When you're gotten a chance to work with these great artists, and you had this position at the university and contributing to the jazz education world, it's got to feel like you've had a lot of success. But these days some people view success as I have X amount of followers, or I played at this place, or I played at this place. Like on November 21st, 2024, what does success mean to you as a musician?
Well, I'm going to start with my family first of all. I've got two children and three grandchildren, and my both of my children are musical, and I one of them, the one that's not doing it full time, is on two of my records, and the one that's doing it full time, I know will record. So that is certainly the most important thing to me. I have a 41-year relationship with a violinist who's been my wife. We met performing together, and
That's amazing.
so, I mean, I don't know all those things, and everything else seems to be like a beautiful part of that family. It starts with the core, and then everything else seems connected to that. And specifically, this new recording project is, it's it's horrifying and exhilarating at the same time. And who knows what project's coming up next? I
No, but it's
just
so nice to hear you've had such a long successful marriage, because it's like I know so many jazz musicians or music who they cannot make it work. They're just not cut out for it. But
and
uh
my wife said she promised herself she'd never marry a musician. So
that's what everyone says, right? Well, no, this has been great. And so, Tom, where can everyone find you online? If there's anything you want to plug, any social
Sure.
media or stuff like that.
Sure. Talking about likes and everything, I'm like 10 years behind. I started a new website a couple of years ago, and then the fella dropped, and I'm still waiting to find anybody want to help me with my website. I'm hiring out. But tomknificmusic.com. I'm on Instagram, tknific, Facebook. I'm really good at putting gigs up there and projects. I'm pretty diligent about that. Those are the two social media things, and I guess I've got some YouTube out there. Eventually, I'll get this new website going. It'll be amazing.
Beautiful. Well, no, this has been great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you're doing.